Hello. Very nice. Thanks for coming out in the snow. It took me almost 2 hours to get here. That was just from Burlington. The 401 is absolutely just crawling.
So you made good time.
What's that?
So you made good
Yeah,
time.
making time. Yeah, not too bad at all. No, it was okay. I had a couple of podcasts on my phone I listened to on the way, and talked to my son, talked to my wife, chatted, as I drove. Talked to Lori once. That's good. So the last time I was here, how many people were here the last time I was here? Anybody?
Probably.
Good. Probably was.
Oh,
Yeah, likely. You're always here, so. So the last time I was here, I did a talk on Team Foundation Server, and it was kind of an overview. It sort of walked through all the tools, right from requirements gathering right through to release management. It just sort of touched on stuff in that. So I thought, I asked Lori, could I come back and do one on release management? So I thought I would go a little deeper into release management, show you guys how to use it, how to get around in it, talk about what it, some of the experience that I've had with it, answer questions. Sound good? Fine. So for those that don't know me, my name's Dave Lloyd. I'm the ALM practice lead at Object Sharp and a founding partner and principal consultant. I'm a trainer. I've written courses on C and Power Builder, and more recently Team Foundation Server and C# and that kind of stuff. I'm a Microsoft ALM MVP, but primarily I'm a developer. That's what I've been doing for the last 30 years, is writing code. A bit of QA in there too. I did a lot of test automation stuff, so I was still writing code. It was fun, right, because I was building automated tests. But kind of with that mix, I sort of fell towards ALM, because I kind of got to see all sort of sides of the software development lifecycle, and it just kind of fit well. So I've been doing that for probably the last 7 or 8 years at least. I've been working with Team Foundation Server since it came out in 2005, but really, kicked into it 2008, 2010. So, and it just keeps getting better and better every 4 months. So the piece I want to talk to you about is release management. So how many people have not heard of Release Manager? That's not a surprise. How many people are using Release Manager? Okay, everybody's heard of it. Nobody's using it. How many people know what it does, what it is? Kind of a yeah? Okay, a little bit. Okay, well, you're going to find out. So essentially, release management is a continuous deployment solution. Microsoft, in their ALM solution, was kind of missing, the developer was pretty well taken care of, and they kind of know that road and went down there. They, as of 2010, they kind of brought the testers on board, because they brought a test manager and tied it in with a lot of other things, and work items were tied to unit tests and to load tests and to web tests, which are tools they had prior to that anyway. So they kind of, brought that whole piece together, but the part that they were missing was the deployment piece. So, we could do continuous integration, we could do, we had our automated builds, we had source control, we had everything we needed inside our ALM package except for the ability to take a build and push it out into an environment. And more importantly, control that and actually let it go through multiple environments. So what Release Manager does is it simplifies the ability to manage multiple environments. The idea is, instead, and I'll go into this in detail, I've only got a couple of slides. I'm going to do mostly demos. Demos always better than slides, right? But essentially, the key to Release Manager is not just about deploying something out into an environment. I mean, we all do that now. Everybody has PowerShell scripts or batch files that do their deployments for them. There's lots of ways to deploy. The idea is being able to push it out into an environment and then let the people that are in charge of that environment control what happens. So being able to say, okay, as a developer, I want to push this into the dev environment. I'm going to run some tests on that. And then when I'm okay with it, when I feel good about that, I want to let the testers know that they can take that and bring it into test when they want to, at their leisure. So they're not phoning me at 10 o'clock at night saying, hey, we need a new build and test. We found a bunch of bugs. We're pushing them towards them, and they can just say, hey, yeah, I'm ready for that. I'll take that now. So it allows that collaboration very easily. And I'll try to show you that and illustrate it. The product itself, even though it came out with TFS in 2013, That's actually when Microsoft bought it, right? It came from a company, anybody heard of InCycle? It's a Canadian company out of Montreal. So Microsoft, essentially, they're an ALM consulting company, and they wrote this software for their customers, and then they, it got better and better, and they ended up marketing it, and then Microsoft decided they would buy it, or buy that division or piece of InCycle, and put it into to TFS 2013. So when they did that, essentially they released it with 2013, but all they really did at that point was change the splash screen to say Microsoft instead of InCycle, because it was already built for TFS. I mean, InCycle had built it to run on TFS. It's been around since 2009. I mean, it's solid. It works very, very well. And now Microsoft, since that 2013 first delivery, and that's what we're going to be looking at, they've moved their way along and done a lot of different things with it. It's going to be available in VSO. It's going to be right now you have to have deployment agents on the machines you're deploying to, and there's going to be options where you don't have to do that. That kind of thing is all coming in 2015, or potentially later, but at least probably most of it will be in 2015. But for now, we've got the release management product as InCycle wrote it, integrated in with Team Foundation Server. So essentially, just to kind of paint the picture of what it is that it does, we all have this. We write our code, we check in the source control, we execute a build. We may or may not, at that point, create some sort of package that can be deployed, and then we manually go and get that package and we push it out into different environments. We've got to put it into dev and some sort of SIT environment or integration test environment. I go to dozens of different customers. It always makes me laugh, all the different names people have for their environments, right? So do any of these sound familiar? Dev, SIT, BAT, Git. Somebody has an environment called Git, believe it or not, and it's not anything to do with Git source control. PAT, of course, UAT, right? So they're all different. Everybody has their own names for them, but generally, it's a developer's environment, some sort of testing environment, whether that's QA or UAT or SIT or whatever you call it, some sort of pre-prod environment, an area where we can deploy it to test out that it's going to deploy okay into production, and then production itself. Right? So we need to be able to coordinate this. The other thing that happens is, pushing it out into dev is usually pretty easy. The dev environment's probably, in most cases, tell me if I'm right or wrong, is generally the messiest of the environments. The database may or may not be up to snuff, or as it is in test, and often test, it's not really generally up to snuff and as it should be in pre-prod or any of the others or UAT. So the further down the line goes, the more people that need to be involved, the more coordination we need to do, the more danger there is as we're deploying it. So we really need to find a way to kind of smooth this out and make it a little bit easier and make it more predictable. Now, as we go through it, we're going to do a deploy and test, and in all the environments prior to production, we're going to have multiple deployments. Right? I mean, you put it into dev. I mean, how many times do you put it into dev? If you're doing continuous deployment, you're putting into dev every time you check in code. Even if you're not, most development teams are probably putting something into a dev environment, likely on a daily basis, at the very least every few days. And you're going into a QA environment, in a lot of places daily, and other ones, at least once a week, I would say, in most places. So, but the idea is, when we get it into that environment, we got to go through, we got to change some code, we got to build and package it, provision the environment, deploy it out into that environment. Somebody's going to execute some tests, and if they fail or if something goes wrong, we're going to cycle back around and do the whole thing over again. And we're going to do that over and over again until we get a build that works properly. And then we're going to make it. Then somebody's going to say, "Yeah, that's good," and we're going to make another build, and we're going to push that off into the next environment. And a lot of times something new has been introduced that we never saw in the last environment because somebody made a change that we didn't know about or whatever happened. And next thing you know, we've got a little bit of a mess going on in UAT, and we really didn't need to get to that point. Didn't need to have that. So the idea of Release Manager is that we utilize the build system, right? How many people use automated builds? How many people use TFS? How many, and of those, are you using automated builds? A couple, not many, wow. So if I check my code in and I let my automated build system create a build for me, and I drop that build into a drop folder somewhere, and then I find some way to deploy that into development, if everything goes okay, and I'm happy with that build, like I test it as a developer, maybe the whole dev team does some tests, some changes that we did, and we validate that it looks good, then why wouldn't we just take that build and now deploy it into our SIT environment, our integration environment? And if it passes that, if it doesn't pass, it gets rejected, and we start again, we do another one, goes to dev, goes to integration. When it passes there, that one goes to QA. So, just taking that one single build and just moving it along just makes a lot more sense than always recreating a new build and pushing it into the next environment, which I see happening all the time. Because then by the time you get going into production, that one build had to have gone through all the environments, guaranteed, if I'm not creating a new build for the new environment. And yeah, I know I might be getting my source code and rebuilding the same source code to go into my new environment, so it should be the same as dev, but should be is not always what happens, right? Okay, I'm going to jump. That's kind of a little high level. What's Release Manager all about? So I'm going to show you how all that fits in. Just before I do that, I want to make one thing really clear. There's a thing that we're going to create inside Release Manager called release paths, and release paths are how we collaborate with everybody else, right? Everybody else in the organization. So each stage that we want to push our code through, or our build through, whether dev, QA, UAT, prod, whatever they happen to be, each stage requires these four steps, four validation steps. I shouldn't really call them validation steps because one of them is validation. So the first one is acceptance. So that means, yes, I accept this into my environment. So whether I'm in charge of dev, or I'm in charge of QA, or I'm in charge of UAT, or production, or whatever environment I happen to be responsible for, when I kick off a release with Release Manager, and it gets to the acceptance step, I'll get an email, and I have to go into Release Manager, not Release Manager the tool, I can actually just go to a website and say, yes, I accept that, which then does a deployment for me. So the deployment itself is kind of an automated step. Nobody has to say, like, by accepting it, the deployment happens. Although there is email notification to someone to say it's been deployed, or it's being deployed. Once it's deployed, there's another step for validation. That's just to make sure, it's like your smoke test. Let's just make sure that it deployed okay. Did we get all the pieces right? Did we change the config file in this environment to point to the right database? Are we pointing to the right web service? Have we got all the pieces that we need? And once it gets past that validation, it is sitting in that environment ready for anybody to take a look at. So if it's QA, then the QA team can hit that and start testing. If it's development, then the whole development team can go in there and start trying stuff out. And then there's a final stage or step called approval. And the idea of this step is a little different than the others. The others each have just one person or one person from a team that can move it along past that step. On the last one, I can set up multiple people. So I can say, the CIO and the QA manager or VP and this person, all three of them have to approve it before it can move into UAT. And that can be different at every stage. So that approval, that final step, that approval, is what essentially moves it on to the next environment. And then it goes back through those 4 steps again for that environment. Some other points that are important to notice here. Each step can be approved by a person or a team. So in those drop-downs, they all say Dave Lloyd just to protect the innocent, but they could be, I could put a team in there, and then anybody from that team could approve it. Email notification can be sent at any one of those steps. Acceptance and validation can be automated. So in a given environment, you'll see there's a little automated flag here. I can automate any one of those steps. So for the dev environment, if I kick off a build, do I really want to go through accepting it? I mean, I kicked off a build that triggered Release Manager. I want to release it. Oh my. Should we be afraid, or are we okay? Does that happen a lot?
Only on the third month.
So likely I want to just automate it, right? So just, let it deploy. If I kick off that build, it's going to trigger my release, and it's going to deploy it. And you know what? I've run this script 1,000 times. I know it's good. I'm going to actually, I'm going to automate both of my steps. So it'll essentially do the acceptance for me. It'll deploy it. It'll validate it. Somebody still has to approve it before it will be sent on to QA. Okay, so we'll talk more about this, but it's kind of a key piece that I'd like everybody to really understand before we get too deep into stuff. So, what are the components? So, what all comes together here? So first of all, Release Manager comes with Visual Studio Premium or Ultimate, and also with Test Professional. So if you have any of those MSDN subscriptions, you have Release Manager already. So it costs nothing. You're running TFS and you have that MSDN subscription, you have the tools you need. Release Management Server for Team Foundation Server 2013 just comes with TFS, so if you're running TFS, you also have Release Manager. It is a separate server to be installed right now. That may change, I'm not sure. Microsoft hasn't really said whether or not it's going to be just incorporated into the TFS or not. Either that or I haven't seen it yet anyway. And then there are Microsoft deployment agents. Now this is kind of a, when I made this slide, you did require a license for a deployment agent, but this keeps changing. You know how Microsoft likes to change their licensing model on a regular basis just to keep us on our toes. And they've essentially, I can't remember, I think it was with update 4, but I would look it up before you trust me, that you no longer need that. You don't need any kind of, there's no licensing at all. So you can install that deployment agent on all your environments, no problem. And as of coming in 2015, you will be able to deploy without having a deployment agent. So you can use PowerShell DSC, you can use Chef, Puppet. That's the other thing is, right now, you can only deploy to a Windows machine because of the agent. As of in 2015, you'll be able to deploy to Macs, Unix, Windows, whatever you want. Matter of fact, this week I just did a DB2 Unix deployment scripts with Release Manager. So the guys, the company that I'm working with was implementing Team Foundation Server, and they want to put everything into source control and TFS, have started putting their deployment scripts that the DB2 guy writes into source control. So I was showing him how to get the source code. So he can, right from his Unix box, check code, check scripts in and out, and then execute a release to deploy it to different Unix environments. So how it works. The way everything kind of ties together, Team Foundation Server is sitting at one end. We execute a build, and that build will drop our binaries into a drop location. That drop location is associated with our release template that's set up in Release Manager. So there's actually a Release Manager server installed. What we often do is just install it right on the build server, but it can be its own server for sure. The other pieces that you need to know about are there are two clients. So there's a release management client that I'm going to show you in a minute. We'll go into. And there's a release management web interface. So the web interface is where 90–95% of the people that are going to use the tool will go. Because all they really have to do, once it's all configured and set up, all they really got to do is say, yes, I approve that build for my environment. Or yes, I validate that it works okay, or that kind of thing. It's only the release manager or somebody who's going to actually create a release that needs the release manager client. That's where we go in and we define what servers we're deploying to, what our environments look like, what our release paths are going to be, what our applications look like and how they get deployed. Okay? And then of course we have all our agents that are sitting out on the environments that we're going to deploy to, if we're using deployment agents. Make sense so far? Clear? You're going to be quiet, this quiet all night? It drives me crazy when you guys are quiet. I much prefer.
Yay!
No, I don't need yay, I just I don't know, talk to me. It's really snowy. It's really snowy out.